Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Today I'm doing a let's test of the Staedtler Lumograph pencils on the Fabriano Accademia cartridge paper. What I'm really testing out is the cartridge paper, not the Staedtler Lumograph pencils. So this is the 200 GSM paper, which comes in a pack of 100. It's the one that I bought from Jackson's Art. You might remember that from my haul, or you may not if you haven't watched it. Just to recap, a let's test is me going through the process of testing products before I do a final review of them. So this is, I think, the second let's test for this paper. For the first one, I tested out the Pigma Micron fine liners on the paper, so I will put a link up on the I button so you can see that if you want to. So let's just get into how the Staedtler Lumograph pencils lay down on this paper. So the first thing I always do is lay down a base layer. It's not necessary to do this, but it really helps me identify exactly where all of the lights and shadows are going to be. No idea why, but that's just how it works with my mind. So normally when I'm laying down a base layer, if I apply the same pressure throughout while I'm doing my fine line toning, which is building up the tone by layers of fine lines next to each other, usually when I'm doing my fine line toning on other pieces of paper, as long as I keep my pressure even, the lay down of the graphite is also even. So what you won't get is random dark spots on the paper. And I'm under the impression that that's because all the hills and valleys on the paper are pretty even. So what I mean by hills and valleys is the texture on the paper. If you have tested out different papers, you might have noticed that you can get incredibly smooth paper, which, if you're trying to put graphite pencil down on it, feels a bit too slick and the pencil or the graphite doesn't lay down well at all. And then you get paper which has texture on it, and the grooves on this paper are often described as hills and valleys. Hills being the high points of the texture and the valleys being the low points. So with textured papers, you have the added advantage of being able to put several layers of the medium that you're using down in order to build up the color or the values. So with graphite pencils, using textured paper is the best option because you get to build up your graphite and create all the different value changes that you want. So for other papers that I have tried, if you imagine a group of, let's say, 5 hills next to each other, imagine all the high points of those hills being pretty even. And if I then apply graphite pencil over high points which are even across all 5 hills, then the same amount of graphite is going to be deposited on each hill, which means that the value of the graphite will look even across the paper. If, however, you have a set of 5 hills and then you have one random one which is much higher than the rest, that means that if I apply the same amount of pressure across the paper, that one high mountain is going to pick up a lot more graphite than the rest of them. And this is something that hasn't normally happened a lot on other papers that I have used. It might happen on one section of the paper, but then the rest of it is perfectly fine. With this paper, I found that it happened all across the paper, all across the page. So I was applying pretty much even pressure throughout the base layer, but you might notice that there's a lot of dark spots of graphite, and that's where there was this random area of paper where the grooves were just a little bit too uneven, and it meant that I had to go back in with my kneaded eraser quite a lot just to clean up the strange laydown of the graphite pencil. And this isn't the worst thing in the world because, as you can see in the video, it is possible to clean it up. But because it's something that I'm not used to happening, it was a little bit strange for me to have to deal with. When it came to applying the second layer, and by the way, I was using the HB lead for the first layer and also the second layer. So with the second layer, I went in with a much harder pressure, and for the most part, I felt like the paper handled this really well. But then there was the occasional place where, again, the hills were a little bit uneven, so I ended up depositing a bit too much graphite, and I had to go back in and fix it using the kneaded eraser. This wasn't actually as bad as I thought it was going to be because of the way the first layer went down. The second layer, where I went in darker, and the amount of corrections I had to make on it, was actually pretty similar to any other paper that I've used. and for that reason I'm not really bothered by it. Something that I really quite like about this paper is the way the graphite pencil feels on it. So normally when I'm dealing with textured paper, the graphite almost feels just a tiniest bit scratchy, and that's normal because you're dealing with graphite and textured paper. It's perfectly normal for that to happen. But on this paper it was actually quite different. It felt incredibly smooth, and I didn't really hear much scratchiness or the scratchy sound that you can usually hear when you're dealing with graphite. I didn't actually hear very much of that. It felt quite nice, actually. It's very different to what I'm used to, and I think that's the most I can say about that. I'm trying to think of something else to say, but truthfully it just felt quite nice to layer graphite on. On the other hand, however, I did almost feel like it was harder to get the most out of the graphite pencils, and what I mean by this is normally the harder you press, the darker the values will be. On this paper I felt like the HB pencil that I was using and then the 2B that I tried to use afterwards just wasn't depositing the maximum amount of darkness or graphite that I would expect. I know that a lot of people, when they're using graphite pencils, they build up their values by using different grades, and the higher the B grade, the darker the graphite pencil is. But for me, I tend to use the same graphite pencil. I would use either a 2B throughout the entire thing or an HB, and if I want a darker value, I just press down harder. But on this case, I couldn't get the darker value that I wanted. I'm not quite sure why that is, and it could very easily be that I'm mistaken. Maybe I'm just rusty in using graphite pencils and I misinterpreted what I'm seeing. But I felt like I couldn't get the darkest value that I wanted out of the same pencil like I would on a different piece of paper. So then I got to the third layer, and for the third layer I switched over to using the Staedtler Mars Lumograph black pencils, purely because I wasn't getting the darkness I wanted in the creases of the eyes. I wanted to give her a cut crease kind of look. So in the end I went in with the 6B of the Mars Lumograph black pencils, and again I felt like this layered very nicely on. I didn't feel like I was being limited. I didn't feel like the texture on the paper was running out, so I couldn't deposit any more of the graphite. I actually think I could have put on another layer of graphite if I wanted to, but for this artwork I didn't want to add another layer because I think that would have ruined it. So based on that, I think you can tell that there's a maximum to what I could test in this artwork on this paper with graphite pencils. And that's really what the Let's Test series is about. It's not about a full review. It's about doing small tests, which tests, a limited amount of things in each one, and then hopefully a year down the line getting to the point where I can do a full review. So things that I wasn't able to test out in this artwork. The first is doing more than 3 layers, which if you are inclined to use more than one grade of graphite pencil to build up your layers, you might want to know if this paper can take more than 3 layers. Secondly, I wasn't able to test out how this paper can handle blending with a paper stump or other tools. And what else was I not able to test? Erasing. I wasn't able to test how this paper can handle erasing. There's actually quite a lot that I wasn't able to test out, but again, that's what the point of a Let's Test is. It's to show you my process in figuring out how good this product is before coming to my final conclusion. So naturally, this one artwork is never going to be able to test everything out. But anyway, I hope that this video was helpful, at least somewhat. And I think I'm going to finish off the rest of this artwork with coloured pencils, but I'm not sure if I'm going to do a combination of Prismacolors and polychromos or if I'm just going to rely on one set of coloured pencils. I haven't decided that yet. But anyway, if you guys have used this paper with graphite pencils, let me know what you thought about it below in the comments. And thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.